As of the October 2024 update to World of Warships Legends, the Tier 8 premium British destroyer HMS Druid is available for 25,000 steel. And the question I want to try to answer today is, should you buy the Druid for 25,000 steel? Now, I've seen a lot of feedback on this ship throughout the community. I haven't actually watched anybody's videos on it, but I've seen the thumbnail. And the general consensus seems to be that HMS Druid is not a very capable ship. I think some would say it's trash and it sucks. Now, I wouldn't go that far. Not too many things in World of Warships Legends are clear-cut, black and white answers, especially when it comes to the capabilities of a lot of ships. There are many ships in this game which have limited capabilities but don't necessarily suck, at least not in all aspects. And I think the reasons most people give for Druid's apparent suckage are reasons that we're going to be able to cover in a little bit. But as for the price and the method for acquiring this ship, it's 25,000 steel, and for all intents and purposes, steel is supposed to be the competitive currency, right? You get it from playing the competitive game modes, i.e. ranked, fleet battles, and, you get a limited amount if you finish a campaign early or buy out a campaign. So if you acquire enough steel to actually get a ship, you probably want to get a ship that is going to allow you to do well. Maybe you want something with a competitive advantage. And if so, then either the Salem or the Missouri, probably in that order, would be the best choices. Salem is basically a Des Moines with a super heel. It's got radar. Missouri is an Iowa-class battleship with radar. There's also Dyson, which is maybe not the strongest, most competitive one out there, but when I had it for rent, I found it to be fun. Druid, on the other hand, we're about to see what I think most people would cite as the main problem with this ship. First, a quick shot at the spotted Z-46 out there, but he goes down before our shells make contact. Here, however, is Velos, giving us broadside. And you'll notice when the AP hits him, it overpens, so it doesn't do the best damage in the world. However, the moment he starts to angle even slightly, then we start getting full penetrations, and the damage is actually quite good. Then Velos turns away and he's fully angled to us, so we have to aim into the superstructure to deal any damage at all. The rest of the shells will just bounce. But you can see by the shell counter in the right-hand side of the screen that the results are about half and half. Half full pens, half over pens. And at the end of things, we've done almost 14,000 damage to HMS Velos. So, would have been more if we consistently got full pens, but we didn't. And I think that's the main issue that most people are going to cite with this ship, that it does overpen damage to destroyers. And the whole gimmick of this ship and its reason for existence, I think, is supposed to be that it's an effective destroyer killer. And it would be if it always got full penetrations on destroyers. I think the reason it doesn't comes down to some basic game mechanics. Now, I don't know the exact numbers here, but all the AP shells have a certain amount of armor that they have to penetrate in order to arm. The idea is they penetrate that armor threshold, they arm, and then they detonate internally inside of the ship, and you get full penetration damage, or citadel damage if the target you're shooting at has a citadel and they detonate internally inside the citadel. Of course, enemy destroyers don't, so you'll never get citadel damage, but you can get full pen damage. However, I think the arming threshold for Druid's AP must be a higher number than the typical destroyer armor value at tiers 7, 8, and legendary tier, which is about 19 millimeters. So if, for example, the Druid's AP only arms after penning 21 millimeters, then you're going to get a lot of overpens on a lot of DDs, aside from some of the rare cases out there like Schultz and Elbing or Kaba or Paolo Emilio. Those have thicker armor on the broadside, and I think Druid's AP shells will penetrate those. In fact, I almost know they will because I came up against an Elbing the other day, and all I got on that thing's 25 millimeter armor seemed to be full pens. So in any case, the armor threshold for the AP actually penetrating has to exceed the typical value of a destroyer armor scheme, and therefore you tend to get overpens until the destroyer angles. Angling effectively increases the thickness of the armor. And so when you're shooting at the angled destroyer and its armor is slightly thicker, then that's where you get the full pens. And we do seem to enjoy improved penetration angles, even if we have a higher penetration threshold than this ship probably should have. So therefore, it's not completely incapable of dealing effective damage to destroyers. It can, it's just not the most reliable, and oftentimes you're going to require them to be slightly angled, which they might not always be, but in practice they seem to end up that way. So this thing is at least okay at taking out enemy destroyers, and it's okay at dealing damage in general. You can see that here against the enemy Alabama. When he was angled and sort of pressed up against the map border, the damage numbers were not great, but as soon as he opens up the angle and gives a little bit of broadside, then we melt away his HP and we take him out for our second kill of the game. The other major problem with the Druid is something that's going to come up a little bit later. Both of the guns are, of course, on the front, and this is a destroyer, so the guns are not exactly protected. I've had a case where the secondary of a Michelangelo actually permanently broke one of my turrets early on in a game, so that left me with only 2 guns. Not exactly a fun time when half of your entire armament gets taken out. And I think I mentioned early on in this video that this game would end up being a tragedy. If I didn't say that, I meant to, and, well, this game is going to be a tragedy. That is going to come down to sort of another problem with the Druid. Now, as we've established, the damage is somewhat questionable against enemy destroyers due to overpens. It's also not great when targets are angled, but it does become fairly good once they open up the angle, and we'll see that here on the République. We were at about 60,000 damage when we started shooting this guy, and by the end of this game, we're going to be over 100,000. All of that is pretty much going to come from the République. So it's not like this thing can't melt HP. It can. But the real problem is we don't have a good way of dealing with the République in a situation like this effectively. We have to get full penetration damage or overpen damage. We have to get AP shell pen damage somehow in order to deal any damage to this guy. We don't have torpedoes, so we can't rely on the big Alpha Strike knockout punch that other destroyers can deliver with their torpedo armaments. But we also can't rely on setting fires either, because we have no HE. Even something like the Friesland, which also doesn't have torpedoes and only has 4 guns, well, it also has HE. So if we were in the Friesland, we would be able to shoot at the République, get a fire, go dark maybe, deploy a smoke screen perhaps, light another fire, and deal damage over time without too much risk of taking damage in return. With the Druid, all we can do is this AP shell pen damage, so we have to constantly be shooting. We can't pause and still continue to do damage with a ticking fire or anything like that because we can't get a fire. Nor can we get floods because we don't have torpedoes. So that presents a problem when you're in a scenario like this, where we've only got 1 teammate left versus an enemy destroyer and this République. The last remaining teammate of ours is a Georgia, who has so far managed to avoid most of the enemy Udachi's torpedoes on the initial salvo, but he's pushing straight into that Udachi, and he's not going to be so lucky on the follow-up. The Udachi is going to take him out, and that's going to leave us alone versus the République and the Udachi. Now, the Udachi is no problem. This ship does have sonar. We would easily be able to approach the Udachi with the sonar on to avoid his torpedoes, and so long as we can spot him, he's not much of a match for the Druid in a gunfight. His turrets just turn too slowly. The HE might hit fairly hard, but the Udachi has some of the lowest HP at tier 7, and practically anything with semi-decent guns should be able to win against it, even with low HP. There, by the way, you see the République's HE taking out both of our turrets temporarily. bit of a nightmare scenario if either of those had been permanent. But now all we can do is farm the Republic when he's spotted. If we're in our smoke screen, we're fairly protected from him, but we can't see him unless he shoots at us and activates the smoke firing penalty. So we have no real good way of dealing with this Republic, and we would need to. We would need to take him out and the Udachi in order to win. The enemy team is simply going to get too far ahead of us on points by virtue of controlling all of the capture circles. Technically, they only control 2 of them, and the Republic is working on the 3rd, but there's no way we'd be winning this game on points. We would have to take both of them out, and at this point, we simply don't have the capability to do so. We've lost too much HP. We maybe didn't need to lose as much HP as we did early on in the engagement with the Republic. He was spotted, and we shot at him before he smoked up in order to activate his smoke firing penalty when we didn't really need to. So we are going to lose this game, and that's going to come down to both the inability to deal big alpha damage with torps and the inability to stack dots through fires and the like. Republic is very close to us, and as soon as we get spotted, we're going to go down. Although we are going to net ourselves the high caliber medal before we actually get sunk, and we finish the game with fairly mediocre, but I'd say also respectable, 120,000 damage done, and nearly 2,000 XP on a loss, thanks to the cap we took and the damage we did to the Velos, I think, in large part. And also the Defender ribbons, those help too. In any case, I think any of the other choices for steel ships are probably better, and you should probably get them over the Druid, because this thing is, well, it's not the most capable destroyer in the world. However, I enjoy it, personally. I think it's fun. It forces you to think differently, and it forces you to be on the top of your game. If you are not very good at the game or not very good at destroyers in general, I don't know how you'll squeeze literally any success out of this ship. I think this ship has a pretty high skill floor, let's say, and you have to do a lot of work in order to be effective in any way, and then sometimes all that work amounts to nothing, like it did in this battle. So I can see why people don't like it, and I would not blame you at all for choosing not to purchase it. In fact, even though I do like playing it and have fun in it, I'd probably take the Salem, Missouri, or Dyson over this thing. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. I think I've rambled on for long enough. Give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.